wanted to take it back a little bit, and this is more your high school years. I wanted to just ask you about your affinity for interest in veterans causes. And of course, you and I are partnering on a Veterans Day event, a Veterans Town Hall, where veterans come together, spend 10 minutes telling about their experience, whether it was in service in general or in combat, of just what their service meant to them. And it was really neat in that discussion as we were setting that up. And you told me some about just the impact during your high school years. And if you would just share with the listeners some of that and some of the really cool things you were part of.
So my high school, if you Google Milwaukee High School, it's Milwaukee with an IE at the end in Oregon. It's in Milwaukee, Oregon, was known for having the biggest Living History Day. And they called it Living History Day because what we would do is fundraise year round and bring in veterans of all like different wars and different lives, and just bring them in, whether if we needed to try to help. They were willing to travel because a lot of them were quite elderly.
Sure.
We would offer to get them drivers, fly them, whatever it took to get them to our high school. And at the time, the administration was really for it. So we would spend literally the week of Living History Day decorating. We would have tanks drove in. We would have helicopters brought in. We covered the entire school in the green like camouflage, but not like we made it out of paper. We got the real stuff and created the infrastructure so that it would be covered. Huge American flags. And for one day we were required, because we've been prepping for it, reading about all the different, whether it was World War II. I remember like we'd meet people and they had participated in it. And all the vets got to feel like celebrities for a day.
Wow.
If you were good at being with people, you got to be like a host. So that was usually my role. I would get to meet them at the parking lot, walk whomever I got assigned to in. Everyone in my school was required to dress up. You had to look your best. And if you showed up with too short of a skirt or without a tie, you got a tie given to you and another skirt handed to you, because everyone was, you're not missing this, you're staying.
Yeah.
And all of our classrooms were decorated. We'd sit there and you'd be assigned a panel, and there would be a panel of veterans. You were prepared to ask questions for whether it was 45 minutes or an hour. We'd switch and go to different classes. Then we would have an assembly. And the assembly was like, I mean, it was a show. News cameras everywhere. I remember presidents would comment on it. Like, it was such a big deal. And it was awesome. And it was impressionable. And I remember just listening to the different veterans. And one statement that really touched me was they would share their stories and say, you have to know this so that it never happens again. It's just like, how else do you understand that?
Yeah.
Like what they suffered, what they saw, what they witnessed, how it affected their families, their partners, their kids, their legacy. They're not sitting there like, war is great, lots of war. It's more like, know about the war so we don't repeat these things.
Sure.
It was awesome. It's always left a big imprint in my heart, in my memory. And I was one of the years that it was like beginning to trail down. I think it was bigger when I was a freshman than when I was a senior. My sister, who's older than me, has even bigger memories of it, of just like, yeah, they had us for a whole school day. Like, she was the one chaining up the camouflage. I was like, oh, when I was a freshman, I just would show up.
Right.
So it was beautiful. And it was really one teacher who was a social studies teacher had the heart for this, and he did whatever it took to make it happen. And schools were bussed in throughout the whole district. Every kid, like, they were all brought to our campus to experience Living History Day.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was amazing. And it was just special. And all the men, they shrink as they get older, and they'd wear all of their different like hats, and they would look to the nines. And they'd get the best parking. We were all asked to park far away. They would get the best seats in the auditorium. We would bring them water, lunch, whatever they needed. We were there. We even had like lines of students who would just clap as they walked in. They got to feel like the whole high school auditorium. And this is a smallish high school, I think, compared to what now is. Like, we were maybe 500 students. So our entire high school gym, we would all be there with all the other high schools there clapping as they all marched in.
That's awesome.
And it was just a day to fill their hearts and be like, we respect you and we honor you for all that you did. all that you experienced, because it's not just the moment that you participated like in a war. It's like your entire life was touched by that. And we got to ask questions. And even when the, silly boy next to me would ask a question like, did you ever kill anyone? They were ready to answer that, and they answered it wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
And I think they took those questions seriously. Because a lot of the boys would be interested in like, have you ever seen a tank?
Right.
I'm like, yeah, let me tell you about tanks. And then we got into the meat and potatoes of it. So when you asked, Patty, I'm putting this event on, and I'm like, I want to be a part of it because, and I always bring up whenever you and I are co-planning, I'm like, how can we invite the high schoolers?
Yeah.
How can we invite those people? Because they get to hear these stories.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to share more about the upcoming
Yeah.
event.
Well, and I want to say, kind of starting off, just thank you for, first obviously partnering with me on that, but just, it means a lot to me as a veteran to see that how it hits your heart of service and the effects of war. And I'm a combat veteran as well. And yes, impacts on me, impacts on my family. Like, it's a reality. And that means a lot to me. So thank you. And it really, what strikes me in how you describe those living history days goes all the way back to when you were telling about how you grew up and your parents being so deliberate to find a community, right? To find a church where you could belong and grow and have support. And I think so much in the moment we're in as our culture, for a variety of factors and reasons, but I think it's fairly commonplace where we struggle to have genuine community. And it's not, I think, as common as in many instances has been. And I think what's so cool about with veterans is the ability to establish some of that community. And even Sebastian Younger's vision for veteran town halls was about, hey, okay, we've got ways of honoring publicly veterans as groups and individuals, but what about that connection of saying, how does the community actually bear some of that load? Right. And even just the listening to, this was my experience when we tell our stories, even just the telling of the story can be really therapeutic, because somebody else is, I've heard it say, like, you kind of have the load, right? It's because now you hear it too and you care, which I think is a really cool part of what we're doing and planning for November. And just the ability to bring community members in, so many of whom are just passionate about supporting and loving on veterans, and then bringing veterans in to just say, hey, this was my experience. I think that's really cool. And thanks for sharing.